What if the reason you feel lost is because you've never truly been alone? What if the noise, the applause, the expectations, the constant proving is the very thing keeping you from becoming who you were born to be? Sometimes the most powerful move you will ever make is to disappear, not because you're weak, not because you quit, but because you are preparing. Silence is uncomfortable for a reason. Most people don't fear failure nearly as much as they fear stillness. When everything goes quiet, no notifications, no conversations, no applause, no distractions, you are left alone with your thoughts. And that is where the real confrontation begins. In the noise, you can pretend. In the movement, you can avoid. In the crowd, you can blend in. But in silence, there is no hiding. The silence forces you to face the questions you've been outrunning. Who are you without the roles, without the labels, without the praise? When the world stops speaking to you, you finally start hearing yourself. When validation disappears, identity gets tested. So many people unknowingly build their sense of self on reactions, on how others respond, approve, applaud, or criticize. They feel valuable when noticed and invisible when ignored. But silence strips that away. It removes the audience. It removes the scoreboard. It removes the external measurement of worth. And what's left is raw and unfiltered. If you only feel confident when someone confirms you, silence will expose that dependency. If your self-worth depends on attention, quiet moments will feel unbearable. But that discomfort is not destruction. It is revelation. It shows you where you have outsourced your value and where you must reclaim it. Silence also reveals the difference between distraction and purpose. When life is loud, it is easy to confuse business with meaning. A full schedule can feel like progress. Constant communication can feel like connection. Endless activity can feel like ambition. But strip it all away and the truth emerges. Are you truly passionate about what you're pursuing, or have you just been moving because stillness felt scary? In silence, motivation either survives or collapses. If your goals are borrowed from family culture, peers, or pressure, they will lose their grip when no one is watching. But if your purpose is authentic, it will whisper even louder in the quiet. Silence filters out imitation and amplifies truth. There is another layer to silence. It magnifies your internal dialogue. The way you speak to yourself becomes impossible to ignore. In the noise, negative self-talk gets drowned out by distraction. But in stillness, every doubt echoes. Every insecurity steps forward. Every unresolved fear asks for attention. This is why many avoid solitude. It holds up a mirror without distortion. You hear the criticism you've internalized. You notice the patterns you've repeated. You see the excuses you've justified. Yet this confrontation is necessary, because once you hear the lies clearly, you can challenge them. Once you recognize the fear, you can dismantle it. Silence does not create your weaknesses. It exposes them so you can strengthen them. Silence also teaches emotional honesty. When you are constantly engaged with others, it is easy to suppress what you truly feel. You smile when you're frustrated. You nod when you disagree. You perform stability when you are unsettled. But when you are alone, the act drops. There is no one to impress, no one to convince. You can finally admit when you are tired, disappointed, confused, or uncertain. That honesty is powerful, because growth does not begin with pretending everything is fine. It begins with acknowledging what is not. Silence gives you the space to process instead of react, to reflect instead of explode, to understand instead of deny. It slows you down enough to feel fully, and in feeling fully, you begin to heal deeply. Most importantly, silence reveals your core values. When you are not trying to meet expectations, impress anyone, or compete for attention, what actually matters to you? What principles remain when popularity is irrelevant? What standards hold firm when nobody is watching? Integrity is not proven in public. It is formed in private. The choices you make in solitude define your character more than any performance ever could. In the quiet, you discover what you stand for because you are no longer standing for applause. You begin to act from conviction rather than reaction. And that is the turning point. Because once you know who you are in silence, the world can no longer redefine you with noise. Distance is not abandonment. It is adjustment. When you are too close to something, too emotionally invested, too surrounded, too immersed, you lose the ability to see it clearly. Imagine standing inches away from a massive painting. All you can see are scattered strokes, random colors, fragments that make no sense. But step back, and suddenly the chaos becomes a picture. That is what distance does for your life. It pulls you far enough away from the noise, the opinions, and the daily repetition so you can finally see the full image of where you are and where you're going. When you remain constantly surrounded by the same voices, the same environments, the same expectations, your vision becomes conditioned. You start believing that what you see every day is the only reality that exists. You absorb other people's fears without realizing it. You inherit limits you never agreed to. You adopt definitions of success that may not even fit your spirit. Distance breaks that conditioning. It gives your mind room to question what you once accepted without thought. And when you begin to question, clarity begins to form. You start asking, is this truly what I want? Or is this what I was taught to want? Distance also reveals which relationships energize you and which ones drain you. When you step away, you notice who reaches out with sincerity and who disappears when convenience fades. You realize which conversations inspire growth and which ones keep you small. Proximity can blur these distinctions because familiarity feels comfortable. But comfort is not always alignment. When you create space, patterns become visible. You see who respects your boundaries and who resents them. You see who celebrates your growth and who feels threatened by it. Distance doesn't destroy real connections. It exposes the fragile ones. Stepping back from your daily routine can also expose whether you are progressing or simply repeating. Routine can feel productive because it keeps you busy, but business is not the same as advancement. When you remove yourself from the cycle, you gain perspective on whether your actions are moving you toward a vision or just maintaining an image. Without distance, you can spend years climbing a ladder only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. Space allows you to evaluate direction before investing more time and energy. It forces you to measure progress against purpose, not pressure. Distance strengthens your decision making because it separates emotion from impulse. When you are deeply embedded in a situation, every reaction feels urgent. Every disagreement feels personal. Every obstacle feels permanent. But with space, emotions settle. You begin to see situations with balance instead of intensity. You respond instead of react. You evaluate instead of explode. Distance gives wisdom the chance to speak before ego interrupts. And in that pause, you make decisions that are aligned with your long-term growth rather than your short-term feelings. Most importantly, distance reconnects you with your own internal compass. In the crowd, it is easy to move in the direction of momentum. If everyone is running, you run. If everyone is chasing, you chase. But when you step away, you feel your own rhythm again. You rediscover what excites you without influence. You remember what matters without comparison. You stop measuring your pace against someone else's timeline. And in that separation, your vision becomes yours, not borrowed, not pressured, not inherited. Clear, intentional, authentic. Isolation has a way of stripping away illusions. When you are surrounded by constant support, advice, reassurance, and backup plans, it is easy to mistake borrowed strength for your own. You feel confident because someone is always there to encourage you. You feel secure because someone is ready to catch you. But when isolation enters your life, those external reinforcements fade. The room gets quiet, the assistance becomes limited. And suddenly, the only strength available is the one you carry within. That moment is intimidating. But it is also transformative because you can never truly measure your power until you stand without leaning. There is a difference between loneliness and isolation. Loneliness feels like emptiness. Isolation feels like refinement. One drains you, the other develops you. When chosen intentionally, isolation becomes a training ground. It forces you to confront challenges without immediately seeking rescue. It demands that you think through problems instead of outsourcing solutions. It requires emotional regulation because there is no audience to perform for and no comfort to distract you. In that process, resilience forms, not loud resilience that needs recognition, but quiet resilience that remains steady under pressure. Isolation strengthens discipline. When no one is watching, your habits reveal your integrity. It is easy to wake up early, stay focused, or push harder when someone expects it from you. It is much harder when there is no accountability partner, no praise, no immediate reward. In isolation, your why must be strong enough to sustain your effort. You either develop self-control or you collapse into excuses. And every small promise you keep to yourself, every commitment honored in private, adds another layer of strength. Discipline built in isolation becomes unshakable because it was never dependent on applause. There is also a mental toughness that forms when you endure silence and solitude. Your mind will test you. Doubt will grow louder before it grows weaker. Old fears will resurface. You may question your path, your progress, even your potential. But the longer you stay present in isolation, the more you realize something powerful. Thoughts do not control you unless you surrender to them. You learn to observe fear without obeying it. You learn to sit with uncertainty without panicking. You learn to continue forward even when motivation fluctuates. That mental endurance becomes armor in future battles. Isolation also teaches self-reliance. When you solve your own problems, when you recover from your own setbacks, when you generate your own motivation, you develop confidence that cannot be handed to you. You stop waiting for permission. You stop depending on perfect conditions. You begin to trust your judgment because you've tested it. And that trust changes the way you move in the world. You speak with more conviction. You decide with more clarity. You act with more certainty. Not because you are fearless, but because you have proven to yourself that you can survive discomfort. Perhaps the greatest strength built in isolation is emotional independence. You learn that your peace cannot depend entirely on others. Your stability cannot hinge on someone else's presence. Your progress cannot require constant validation. In solitude, you discover how to calm your own storms. You learn how to encourage yourself when energy dips. You find ways to create joy without external stimulation. And once you master that, you stop fearing separation. You stop clinging to environments out of insecurity. Because you know something unshakable wherever you go, you bring your strength with you. There is a reason the most powerful transformations in nature happen out of sight. Roots grow beneath the soil. Diamonds form under pressure, far below the surface. Even the strongest foundations of a building are laid underground before anyone admires the structure above. Growth is delicate in its early stages. It needs protection. It needs stillness. It needs space away from interference. When you attempt to grow in full public view, exposed to every opinion and reaction, your development becomes vulnerable to distraction and doubt. Privacy is not secrecy. It is safeguarding your evolution while it is still forming. When you announce every goal before you've built the discipline to sustain it, you invite unnecessary pressure. Opinions start pouring in. Expectations start building. Comparisons start creeping in. Instead of focusing on the work, you begin managing perceptions. Instead of improving quietly, you begin performing prematurely. Growth requires concentration, and concentration thrives in privacy. When no one is watching, your energy stays directed toward progress rather than approval. You move because you are committed, not because you are observed. And that difference changes everything. Privacy also protects you from external negativity during vulnerable phases. Not everyone will understand your vision. Not everyone will support your shift. Some people are comfortable with who you used to be and feel unsettled when you begin to evolve. If you expose your unfinished transformation too early, criticism can stunt your confidence before it has fully matured. Early growth is fragile. It bends easily under judgment. But when nurtured in private, it strengthens quietly until it no longer depends on validation to survive. By the time others see the results, the foundation is already solid. There is power in building without broadcasting. When you train your mind, sharpen your skills, and refine your character away from the spotlight, you create depth. Depth cannot be faked. It cannot be rushed. It develops layer by layer through repetition and reflection. Public recognition often focuses on outcomes, but private work focuses on process. And process is where true mastery lies. In privacy, you are free to make mistakes without embarrassment. You can experiment, fail, adjust, and improve without the fear of being misunderstood. That freedom accelerates authentic growth. Privacy also strengthens humility. When you grow quietly, you learn to value substance over attention. You stop measuring success by how many people notice and start measuring it by how much you've improved. You become less reactive to praise and less shaken by criticism because your confidence is rooted in your private discipline. The world might only see the finished result, but you know the hours, the setbacks, the sacrifices that shaped it. That awareness grounds you. It keeps you focused on becoming better rather than appearing better. Most importantly, private growth builds inner security. When you transform without announcing every step, you detach your identity from public reaction. You don't need constant acknowledgement to feel accomplished. You don't need applause to validate your effort. Your motivation becomes internal. And when motivation is internal, it is sustainable. You show up because you are committed to who you are becoming, not because you are trying to impress others. By the time your growth becomes visible, it is no longer fragile. It is steady. It is confident. It is undeniable. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. People often confuse it with indifference or coldness, but true detachment is clarity. It is the deliberate decision to separate who you are from what you have, what you do, and how others perceive you. Over time, without realizing it, you begin to attach your identity to roles, your profession, your social circle, your achievements, your reputation. You introduce yourself by titles. You measure yourself by results. You define yourself by how you are treated. But when those external markers shift, as they always do, your sense of self shakes with them. Detachment interrupts that cycle. It forces you to ask, if all of this disappeared, who would I be? Many people live trapped inside identities they never consciously chose. They become who their family expected them to be. They mold themselves into what their environment rewards. They maintain an image because it is familiar and accepted. Over time, the performance becomes so practiced that it feels natural, but detachment pulls the mask away. When you step back from constant validation and routine, you begin to see where you were pretending. You notice which behaviors were driven by fear of rejection rather than authenticity. You recognize where you silenced your real voice to maintain approval. That awareness can feel uncomfortable, but it is liberating. Because once you see the mask clearly, you can choose whether to keep wearing it. Detachment also exposes emotional dependencies. If your mood rises and falls entirely based on someone else's attention, you are attached to their reaction more than your own stability. If your confidence collapses the moment you fail, you are attached to success more than growth. If criticism defines you, you are attached to perception more than principle. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop allowing external forces to dictate your internal state. You learn to care deeply without clinging desperately. You learn to pursue goals passionately without making them your identity. That balance creates freedom. There is strength in separating your worth from your wins. Achievements are valuable, but they are not you. Losses are painful, but they are not you either. When you detach from outcomes, you begin to operate from purpose rather than ego. You stop chasing applause and start chasing alignment. You stop fearing failure as a personal verdict and start viewing it as information. That shift changes how you move. You take risks with more courage because your identity is not fragile. You can fall without feeling erased. You can lose without feeling worthless. Detachment makes resilience possible. Detachment also clarifies relationships. When you are not clinging to someone out of fear of being alone, you begin to see them more objectively. You recognize whether the connection is built on mutual growth or mutual dependency. You see whether you are staying out of love or out of habit. Sometimes detachment reveals that certain bonds were sustained by convenience rather than compatibility. And while that realization may be difficult, it prevents you from shrinking yourself to maintain connection. Detachment allows you to choose relationships consciously rather than cling to them unconsciously. Ultimately, detachment breaks the illusion that you are what you possess, achieve, or display. It reminds you that identity is internal, not external. When you detach from false labels, you rediscover your core values, your genuine desires, and your authentic voice. You begin to build a life that reflects who you truly are instead of who you felt pressured to become. And once you are no longer bound by borrowed definitions, you move with a different kind of confidence, one that does not fluctuate with circumstances because it is rooted in self-awareness rather than surface validation. There comes a moment after silence, after distance, after isolation and detachment, when it is time to return. But you do not return the same. You do not re-enter rooms seeking approval. You do not step back into conversations looking for validation. You return with something far more powerful than attention. You return with alignment, and alignment changes the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you decide. Because when you've done the work in private, you no longer need permission to take up space. You simply occupy it. Returning with purpose means you are no longer reacting. You are directing. Before, you may have moved according to pressure. You responded to expectations. You adjusted yourself to fit environments. But now, your decisions come from internal clarity. You know what matters to you. You know what you stand for. You know what you will no longer tolerate. That certainty eliminates hesitation. It doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you grounded. When your purpose is clear, you stop explaining yourself to everyone. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop waiting for agreement before you act. There is a distinct energy in someone who has prepared in silence. They don't need to announce their transformation. It shows in their discipline. It shows in their composure. It shows in their restraint. They speak less, but with more weight. They move less, but with more intention. That energy comes from internal work that required no audience. When you return after disappearing, you are not trying to prove anything. You are demonstrating growth naturally. Your confidence is quieter, but stronger. It does not demand recognition because it does not depend on it. Returning with purpose also means you understand timing. You no longer rush into opportunities out of fear of missing out. You no longer chase everything that sparkles. You evaluate, you assess, you choose strategically. Because you've spent time in reflection, you recognize distractions faster. You recognize misalignment quicker. You say no more often, not out of pride, but out of focus. Purpose filters your decisions. It keeps you from scattering your energy across places that cannot sustain your growth. When you move with intention, every step counts. There is also humility in returning prepared. You understand that growth is ongoing. You don't see your comeback as an arrival. You see it as a continuation. The difference now is that you move with ownership. You no longer blame circumstances for stagnation. You no longer depend on motivation alone. You rely on discipline built during isolation. You rely on clarity shaped by distance. You rely on identity strengthened through detachment. Your return is not fueled by excitement alone. It is supported by structure. And perhaps most importantly, when you return with purpose, you stop seeking permission from the world to become who you already are. You do not wait for validation to start building. You do not wait for applause to begin leading. You do not wait for universal understanding to pursue your calling. You recognize that approval is optional, but authenticity is essential. So you step forward, not loudly, not desperately, but decisively, because you've already proven to yourself in private that you are ready. So understand this: disappearing was never about hiding. It was about becoming. You stepped away not because you were lost, but because you refused to stay unfinished. You endured the silence. You faced yourself without distraction. You built strength without applause. You broke false identities. You detached from what was never truly you. And now you don't return seeking attention. You return carrying substance. There is a difference between someone who is seen and someone who is solid. When you've done the work in the dark, you don't need to announce your growth. Your discipline speaks. Your clarity speaks. You don't move with noise anymore. You move with intention. And here's the truth most people will never understand. The season of disappearance is not a setback. It is a setup, because when you are brave enough to step away from the world's expectations, you give yourself permission to meet your true self. And once you meet that person, once you know who you are without applause, without pressure, without permission, you will never shrink again. So if you must disappear, disappear with purpose, disappear with faith, disappear with fire in your spirit. And when you return so grounded, so disciplined, so clear that your presence alone shifts the room. Not because you demanded attention, but because you earned transformation.